Okay, it's nice to meet everyone here. I have never attended one of these things before. Um, and today we'll be discussing the stereotypes and myths of dragons, things that seem to be mostly concepts made by people. One of the things that I think Zeppy wanted me to post for today is that I am not a dragon, so it's easy for me to point out certain stereotypes and things, and we can have a discussion regarding where these stereotypes and myths have come from, and if they're real and if they're not. So, let's start with some thoughts and opinions on maybe some things you can think of. What I can recall from earlier this evening was talking about dragons and their nature of being good or evil. As far as I have come to know, at least looking at them the way that um, like I had mentioned, being a person, and before being with Seppi in my previous life, that is the life that I am currently aware of. Um, we are very much like life now, that dragons don't exist, and they are mythical creatures from far reaches of the world. I have traveled a lot in the past and had heard many tales of fantastic beasts and seen much art depicting such creatures. It's interesting now that I am with one. Um, Depending the culture, dragons are seen as either good or evil or even neutral. From our medieval texts and things of our stories, they were not seen as positive beings. Personally, I recall the tale of the Harask that was in my home country and how it terrorized a little French village up that way. I don't recall where that might have been, but I assume most of you are aware of that story. And then, if you go farther east, you find dragons to be benevolent, and forces of nature things to be respected, but could also do great good of humanity. And many thought they were descendants of these dragons. So, where do you think that most people, I feel in popular culture now, dragons have a more benevolent feel, but there's still this stigma that dragons are evil creatures. How would you think that got started? And is it true or not? Obviously, it's not true. Not all dragons are like this.
Yeah, I would say that the stereotype of, if I can butt in for a second.
Yeah, it's kind of an open discussion.
Fair. I would say the myth of dragons being scary, evil, and terrifying comes from people's, like in the ye olden days, people's fear of anything spiritual, any beast, any animal. Like let's say in Britain, for example. In Britain, they wiped out all their wolves. People thought that wolves were these scary, horrific, bloodthirsty beasts that would rip you apart if you even got a mile near them. And I imagine that was applied to dragons or any mythical creature, like, oh, big scary, oh, scary creature with large teeth, apex predator. It must be a horrifying beast, bloodthirsty beast. I'm assuming that's where it came from. And people's fear of ghosts and whatnot. Anything they didn't understand, especially in those days.
I would agree. A lot of things in that stereotype are very true, and mysticism and mysterious things didn't really come toward my or I suppose we were more curious about things like that. But the feeling and the grip of the unknown and the things that looked different and acted different from us that scared us was very true. Even as simple as someone looking different, because it was deemed evil. I think also religious beliefs of the times could also have facilitated that. Whereas in other places, if you look in ancient Greek beliefs, there are dragons, but they're not always really seen as good or bad, more like instruments to carry out certain tasks. And they're more neutral, and it feels like that fits in with the beliefs that those people have. I suppose we could say for this one that religion could play a big part on whether or not sees someone would see a dragon as good or bad. And
I
that
believe you're. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, and that the more or less that where you are in the world that would dictate that stereotype. Because if we were having this discussion and this was a more Asian centric Dragonkin uh, meetup, we might not even be discussing this.
Slaying dragons is a Western concept, or
Exactly.
solely a Western concept, I believe. I also know that dragons in the Bible were associated with Satan, so I imagine that also contributed to that fear.
I imagine that was a big part of it.
I must have missed that.
I don't think we'll ever know what was the basis for the stories where we have documents explaining dragons and such. I personally would like to know the whole story with the Tarask, for instance. But I guess that is uh yet to be seen. Another if we may move on from this topic, there is a plethora of myths and legends and stereotypes of dragons, is the one regarding them eating certain things. I know that my love gets very upset hearing about this particular one as she doesn't agree with it. That dragons eat, I believe it was crystals, not necessarily rocks, but crystals. I don't believe I've ever heard such a thing in my time. For those who do not know, I come from the late Victorian era, so I can't say that from what I remember in stories and such. We've heard of dragons eating such foreign objects outside of meat. So, what would your opinions be on dragons eating stones and fancy crystals? What is the basis for that? Do you feel that is something that people have made up or made up recently? Or is there real scientific groundings for how you experience things as a dragon?
The rocks thing, I definitely understand. I know there's animals that eat certain rocks or to get certain nutrients, and I imagine that a lot of dragons would be, or some dragons would be similar in the sense that they would have to eat something close to rocks, like minerals, if to get the proper nutrients. Crystals, though, I'm not. I know Lunata didn't do that. Well, Lunata doesn't have to eat at all. She's an energy being, not a biological being. So if she eats, it's purely for pleasure. I think she eats rocks as a joke sometimes, though. So yeah, I guess some dragons are like macaws or birds where they go to clay cliffs to eat clay, that kind of thing, to get proper nutrients.
I have heard of that. Zeppi has told me about birds and other animals going to seek minerals in certain places just so that their nutrition is balanced.
Yeah, like for proper bone growth, that kind of thing.
That's correct. In fact, it's something that some of the birds that she has right now even do. I know out in the wild. As far as I know, I believe it is alligators and also crocodiles that eat rocks to help them with digestion in terms of grinding the bones. I believe some birds also do this as well. I'm not a big naturalist like Zeppi is, but as far as I know,
Understandable. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add in that department.
he's telling me a story that apparently it was a big stereotype for a while, specifically on Tumblr,
I
that
see.
dragons would eat crystals. And she recalled hearing someone say, in order for someone to curb their draconic uh, impulses, I suppose, they would eat rock candy.
I see. A kind of a goofy thing, though. Sometimes I eat M&Ms to satisfy cravings for aquarium gravel.
It's funny you mentioned Zeppi showing me that she once got gifted a bag of rocks, but they were not rocks, they were chocolate, but they
Mm,
were colored to look like pebbles. It's fascinating, actually, now that I see it. They really do look like rocks.
yeah.
But it was chocolate. It was bits and pieces of chocolate. So if you really do eat rocks, I suppose using certain candies would be applicable for that. I do
Oh
not
yeah.
know where dragons eat crystals come from. She's also telling me that a show, um, I believe it's called My Little Pony, had a dragon that ate crystals.
Yeah, that's where I first heard of it in human media, at least.
She said it's possible that influenced it, but she
Possibly.
never heard about it.
I can't say for sure though.
I, like I said, I don't know. I'm going off what she's telling me.
Understandable. Oh, now I want chocolate rocks though.
She says that before, I guess, the rise of the internet, she had never heard of anything about dragons eating rocks, more about dragons wearing them. I guess that could lead to a next question.
Hmm.
There is a myth or stereotype of dragons hoarding gold, jewels, precious items. In old stories, we even see this in things like Beowulf. Why do you think dragons hoard things? Is it a stereotype or is it true? And if so, being it true, why do they do it? If it's not true, where did this start and why?
I know a lot of dragons I know do hoard, though I I wouldn't know the why they hoard, whether it's out of a compulsion or an instinct or something else entirely. I wonder if for some dragons it would be a survival mechanism, depending on what they hoarded.
I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of anything I know in the natural world that does such a behavior.
Ravens and crows.
Okay. And they do it for courting reasons, I believe.
I don't know why some crows and ravens like shiny things. I could probably find an article on it later.
That might be the key to figuring out why some dragons might do it.
Yee.
I do not know. Like I said, Zeppi is infinitely more of a naturalist I will ever be. I thought, whenever I heard stories of dragons hoarding, that it was some sort of metaphor to symbolize maybe a draconic need for greed, or something of that sort. That dragons are naturally greedy creatures.
Yeah, where it came from in the older human stories, I imagine it was influenced by people's fear of dragons. Like, oh, these creatures are evil and they're gonna keep all our money from us European peasants or something like that.
Perhaps it would make sense. That's why a lot of people would say people like kings are dragons.
Oh yeah.
It does seem like if there is dragons that are to be hoarded, it's not the Eastern dragons that do so. I think if the Easterns do any kind of hoarding, it's more or less things that are more valuable than material wealth. The dragons of the East, rather than and the dragons of the West, they're more likely to be materialistic
Oh yeah, 'cause look at all those massive castles.
as well.
I know that Lunat does not hoard. She just has a very large, organized collection. Kind of like I do upon this earth. I don't hoard. I don't engage in hoarding behaviors. Or draconic hoarding behaviors. I just collect things and organize them pretty well.
Zeppi is reminding me that she has many different collections of interesting things and knickknacks. She
Nice.
says for her, she collects items that make her feel good and remind her of things. She collects things she finds beautiful and interesting. It's not necessarily a compulsion, but just to have things that will have meaning or have meaning. As well, I believe she had mentioned earlier that she uses these items also to contain memories, as her memory has begun to fail her. So it's one way of holding on. Another reason she has certain items is for the uses they bring. She does have a plethora of crystals. I am looking at them currently. But she says that she needs them for her spiritual practices and that it's important to have energies and such around. She collects books in favor of stories and knowledge, as that is her main thing. She doesn't feel she does anything hoarding related that is clinical. She is telling me that what a way dragons hoard and not to get mixed it up with clinical hoarding, which is when you can hoard things that have no meaning and they end up taking over your home and your life to the point you're living very poorly. That is not what she does.
Understandable. I know I have a collection of special items that I use in both indigenous ceremonies and draconian rituals. And each of these ritual items slash ceremonial items has a lot of meaning to my being. Like the eagle feathers or the pieces of gold that I have, they all have a very special meaning to my being. And my wish for collecting certain things stems from Lunat's fascination of certain objects, and that's why I collect them.
Makes sense. It looks like you're getting a lot of discussion in the panel. It's good to see. I can't
Yeah,
remember. Did I properly introduce myself? I don't remember if I did.
understandable.
Um, I know we're almost halfway into the discussion,
Hmm.
but yes, I am not a dragon. I am here simply to aid Seppi, as she does not wish to be here at this time.
Fair enough.
I think it is also interesting, Ryu, as well. Dragons, from what I have understood, were always chimeras of different animals, made up of things that maybe man find fearsome and scary, and as such did not merely resemble one type of animal, but many in their behaviors and look. It's kind of
Hmm.
fascinating to be here and see just how different all are. While if I was talking perhaps to a unicorn meat, everything might be horse-centric in terms of behavior and other things as well.
Hmm. Considering how unique dragons are, even in centuries old media, it's kind of ironic how common elitism and gatekeeping can be in the Draconic communities, though. That's just a little tidbit. I'm not going to go into that.
I've heard a bit about that areas. I still find that fascinating. If you look at early works that I can recall, if anyone is familiar with Edward Topsell and his books regarding dragons and naturalism, I would recommend it. The dragons that he portrayed in his work were very diverse. I suppose
I
he
can
was
imagine.
one of the first to look at dragons and their diversity. I suppose we'll continue with other questions. When I see dragons, or have always thought of dragons, I've always pictured them as fearsome beasts with a taste for flesh. Most people, even in media and video games, still think dragons are bloodthirsty creatures, being primarily carnivores and nothing else. This is seen in a lot of areas. Would you agree with that or not? I know Zeppi is not necessarily the greatest speaker for this topic in general, because unfortunately, Zeppi falls in the category of being the most stereotypical Western dragon out there. I suppose it is good that I am taking over this.
Understandable. Lunat is a very Lunat herself is not a dragon. She's a draconic being. That's the best way I can describe her. She doesn't describe herself as a dragon, and the dragons of her homeworld, her home realms, they don't consider her a dragon. So she just labels herself as draconic. Same thing with my Lyco-draconic self. She's just draconic. She's not a dragon. Kind of ironic for my being hosting the Draconic Summit that I'm not actually a dragon, though.
I am so far down the line of even questioning anything at this point. You could say that you knew the Tooth Fairy and it drove a UFO to work, and I would believe you.
Fair. Though, yeah, Lunat is super unique, even among Earth and Dragons.
So, for those who haven't caught on, we are now speaking about if dragons are bloodthirsty creatures. Why do you have this stereotype of dragons craving human and animal flesh?
I imagine it my previous point, I imagine it stems from the fear of dragons, though. I know a lot of dragonkin that I know were feral apex predators, so I imagine that's where some of that comes from. Lunat herself can also be kind of bloodthirsty when she gets really angry. Same thing with Narok. She is an apex predator with very limited intelligence who's very much driven by instinct. So, in many people's eyes, she could be considered bloodthirsty.
Interesting. Looks like the chat is still discussing.
Yes.
Like I said, most of it did seem to stem from like dragons being devilish creatures and representing everything that is terrifying for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Probably to serve as some sort of repercussion if anybody were to act badly regarding things. I
Yeah.
find it interesting that there's still a lot of media being made showing that dragons are bloodthirsty creatures.
Mm-hmm. I know apex predators upon this earth, like wolves, bears, tigers, lions, are also viewed that way. Even though they don't hunt out of malice or grudges or a wish to hunt. They do it purely out of instinct.
Exactly. There is no good or bad when it comes to carnivores. It's just them surviving and providing a need to the environment, making sure herbivores don't overpopulate and tip the scales. Carnivores are just as important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is my personal viewpoint, though. I think that the term bloodthirsty, this is how I view it personally. Not everyone use it the way I do. I think bloodthirsty implies a wish to seek blood, an active thirst for blood, rather than simply an instinct that drives an animal to survive. Though that's just my being.
No,
I think that for bloodthirsty, there needs to be bloodthirsty, there needs to be intent. With animals, there's no intent. It's instinct. It's an I'm doing this to survive, not that I'm seeking out blood because I want to. But that's just my being. Not everyone views it the way I do, and that's perfectly fine. That's just my thing.
I agree. I think that is a good distinction. When it comes to those behaviors, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I guess if that question is used up, we can continue to some other stereotypes and myths for dragons. So,
Yeah, fair.
dragons are also viewed as all powerful, all knowing creatures, being infinitely strong. Nothing can really get rid of them. Nothing could really kill them unless there is a brave knight willing to do it. Would you say that dragons are in fact overpowered by nature, or are they weaker? For example, things like lions and tigers are seen as extremely strong, but they don't seem to hold the otherworldly strength that dragons do. Is that accurate to see if a dragon is that overpowered?
Well, for Lunat, she's not really a dragon, though Lunat is a divine being, divine celestial being who is beyond the touch of mortals, that kind of thing.
Right.
Though
So I guess
most
it would be.
most dragonkin that I know don't see themselves as these sort of divine, untouchable beings.
I've heard that it has been a problem in these circles,
Yeah.
where some might feel that. Is there a
Mhm.
chink in Dragon's armor?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Would there be a chink in someone's armor then?
Mm. Sorry, I'm blanking out.
That's okay.
So
I
much
mean,
noise in my house right now.
I'm sorry.
All good. We're just distracted.
It seems like dragons are very much a metaphor for many things.
It seems that way, yeah. Especially when you really look into the stories and understand the context of how life was in ye olden days.
And like you said, that dragons are literally force of nature and some. I imagine Zeppi is telling me how the Godzilla movies are depicted.
Yeah, Godzilla is a metaphor, or was a metaphor in the first movie, I believe.
I believe he was. At least that's what Zeppi is saying.
I see. I know Norok isn't anything special in her physical lives. She's just a wolf.
Zeppi
Norok.
is. Yeah, I'm
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying that Zeppi is telling me that in some ways, being a dragon has been fun because there is that sense of power that nothing else can hurt you. And sometimes she feels a little delusional in that she feels like she is untouchable and way too strong for anything to hurt her. But sometimes has to realize that she still bleeds, and there's always something that can be bigger and stronger and smarter than her. But
I
most of the
see.
time, she lives as if nothing can.
A draconic pride sort of thing.
I believe so. We could also look at the fact that it also might be a way of Zeppi's feeling to cope with things in her life that have been uncontrollable. But that's a different story. I'm sure
Understandable.
that plays a role in it as well.
Yeah. So yeah, Narok isn't anything special. She has some level of intelligence. She has the ability to, spare someone. She holds a grudge sometimes. She understands the concept of love, though it's very vague. I know Narok has actively engaged in like revenge hunting to people who have actually actively hurt her. In those cases, Narok can be considered bloodthirsty because she was actively out for blood with intent.
Interesting.
It's pretty few and far between. It's not meant. Very few of the elves of Narok or humans, whatever, of Narok's homeworlds would be willing to do her harm like that. But when they did, she was definitely out for blood.
It makes sense. I imagine a creature that has intelligence and the ability to think and feel as complex as I do might engage in bloodthirst every so often. I feel dragons naturally would be very prideful creatures considering their gifts. They are typically large and formidable. They are typically very strong. They have very sharp teeth and claws. They're able to move on land as well as in the sky. It is, and some even in the water. It is almost unfair, and that they are able to have all these advantages in all dominions, making them very difficult to get rid of or outnumbered.
Yeah, the pride of an apex predator.
I too have understood this from my life and what I have done, using the intelligence that I know, the skill set I have, that you get a little prideful in that you're untouchable and nothing can harm you. Nothing can put a chink in your armor when you have so many abilities and can fool or kill anybody you wish. I think the interesting part here is no matter who you are, even if you're a person like I am, or a formidable dragon, somebody can always slay you.
Understandable. I know Altanok and Volantile are very, extremely prideful. Not just because they're divine beings, just mainly because that's just how they are. They've always been kind of prideful.
It would make sense. I get that way too sometimes. I may not
Yeah.
always like myself for many reasons, but the pride that I have for who I am as a person is very high.
Understandable. Lunat is also prideful in a sense, though she doesn't boast like Altanok and Volantile do. She's just, yeah, I'm so cool. I'm a celestial being.
Subject to that extent.
Yeah, like she knows her place in the world and she is very proud of it. Though she doesn't talk about it. She doesn't boast about it. I don't have that pride upon this earth personally. I just view myself as a normal individual just like everyone else, despite my draconity. So yeah.
Understandable. I suppose in some ways I can identify a lot with dragons I am learning. I guess
Mm-hmm.
we'll move on to more stereotypes discussions.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to point out though that I have met a lot of dragonkin that are very humble, that are very not prideful. So yeah, the pride dragon thing definitely seems to be a bit of a stereotype.
I think it's a stereotype, but that one might be founded on some truth.
Understandable.
Even Zippy seems to admit with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll do one or two more questions and then we'll have more of a group discussion and people can share their thoughts.
Understandable.
Dragons seem to be nocturnal and hide in dark, scary, formidable places where people are afraid to venture. Do you think the stereotypes of dragons living in caves and in dark swamps and other dank places are founded on some truth or something man made?
I think it is founded on some truth, mainly because I know some dragonkin who have dwelled in caves and other dark places or that people would consider gloomy environments. So yeah, I think it's based on some truth.
The way me and Zeppi live are very similar. Perhaps I am a dragon.
Dragon adjacent or some
Something like that.
whatever you think.
Something like that. I can't speak
Yee.
too much on the issue, for a good part of my life was spent in underground and living in a dark place. So I apologize. I cannot really say much on that. But living in a home, a nice house, probably would have been a lot healthier.
Understandable. I know Lunat lives in what I call her celestial realms. She lives among these energy. I wouldn't say it's an illusion, though. It's not physical either. It's this realm of mountainous forests and stardust and whatnot. Though it's not. It's not physical. It's not terrestrial. It's something else entirely. Yet you can still touch it, or yet she can still touch it.
Seems rather incomprehensible.
Yeah,
I do apologize if a lot of what I say is especially criticism-centric. That just happened to be the way I was, um, how I experienced life in particular. Not that
all
I
good.
ascribed to it, but that is exactly the kind of lifestyle that is put upon me in my life.
All good. I understand.
I think it's possible. When I think of dragon stereotypes for Easterns, I think of them always being benevolent and having something to do with a natural element, like rain or wind. But I know that that's not completely true. I don't know if there are enough Eastern dragons here who speak on that matter. I have to believe that there are Eastern dragons that may not be so good, or ones that may not be in control of some elements. I am lacking in that knowledge, and Zeppi doesn't seem to know much either.
Understandable, and I would think so.
If you do have sources, I would imagine it would be beneficial to share them with the group, either here or in another channel.
E.
I think we could all use a little refresher on the vast majority of Eastern species and how they're all not positive and rain controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So I do appreciate that feedback. Zeppi continues to say, as a dragon, she would be most at home in a cave. A place where the walls aren't too terribly slick. The floor she would keep clean for herself. A place maybe with a grotto, an inside waterfall, and a way to go out into the world and get fresh air as well. She appreciates the dark and the nocturnal nature of how she is. Like I had mentioned, Zeppi is very stereotypical of a dragon when we think of it. But I am finding that it's very rare to have a stereotypical dragon, as most of the dragons here do not fit any kind of stereotype one way or the other. It seems to be pick and choose.
Mm-hmm. So hey, Wonderlight.
Hi, hello, yes. The reason why I raised my hand is because one thing that I wanted to mention is I think the best way to explain this is there's a big stereotype of dragons being really animalistic. And in terms of me, I am only slightly dragon-like, but I think I'm I'm not saying all dragons aren't animalistic, but I'm also not saying all of them are. If that makes sense.
I do believe so. And I think it's interesting you bring that up. Dragons are very vast in terms of intelligence. Zeppi says that she has met some that are no more intelligent than some of her birds, and others might have a good mind like any one of her co-workers. For Zeppi, it seems like she has a good mix of both animalistic intelligence and other higher cognitive functions. Or do you think just the bestial nature of them came through?
Yeah, understandable.
I think I was more talking about the bestial nature, as you said, but yeah. I know for sure like you said, some dragons are bestial and some are not. Yeah.
That does seem to vary greatly. But it's interesting. Once again, we have brought it up. I do believe we have some time for some active discussion on dragon myths and stereotypes. Is
Mm-hmm.
there anybody else who would like to talk regarding these?
Yeah, stage is open.
We could also discuss any particular myths as well. I can't say I know everything, but currently I can get whatever information I need from Zeppi's head.
That's fair.
And she would like to share some stories.
Come to think of it, I wonder. I know there were like elves or humans, humanoid creatures in upon the worlds of Norok's physical lives. This panel has made my being think. What do they think of Narok? Do they view her as a bloodthirsty beast? Do they view her as a benevolent being, a guardian? Though I don't know. I don't know what they thought about Narok. Though it's interesting to think about what kind of stories they made up about my being.
I think it's also fascinating to see if there were to be a dragon in this time period, as I am used to another, what people might think of dragons now as well. I have become aware of many things that have painted dragons in a more positive light, where children are actively holding things like dragon stuffed animals and playing with dragon toys and playing pretend as dragons. Books geared toward children, all kinds of other things, getting all kinds of people happy and excited about dragons. In my
Yeah.
era, this would have been very, very strange. It would
Mm-hmm.
not have went over well whatsoever. I did not have a very close association with dragons in my time. I did not have a close association with any specific mystical beast, but I know that if a dragon were to come out of the sky in the time that I was alive, ugh, it would have been another horrible thing for Victorian France to deal with. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think people would have been excited at all. I doubt anybody would have been very excited. At that time, it was more important to find the reptiles that had long been dead and figuring out what those were about, rather than wishing something completely terrifying as a dragon would come through. I do not really find dragons scary at this point in time, but with people in that mindset from when I was alive, we might think differently. But now, dragons are painted very friendly, and obviously, I like them for many reasons now, Zephyr being the primary.
It seems like the view of dragons, like with wolves, has evolved. Like most people no longer view wolves as these horrifying, bloodthirsty beasts like they did in ye olden days. Now they're realizing, oh, well, wolves are not really bloodthirsty. They'd rather avoid people than attack. Obviously, I'm not saying that's a context of dragons, though. The view has shifted to something more positive.
I intend to agree. Like I had mentioned, my living standards were very Christian based and centered, and that was just par for the time. Nothing that I could deal about it. Things like a dragon were always talked about in a negative light. And even if you just wanted to play pretend for fun, it was not something that was looked upon as favorable. If you
Yeah.
want to play for fun, you best better be playing as a dog or a cat. Something simple, less scary. But things
Yeah.
that were mentioned in the Bible as being the servants of the devil, not so much. Zeppi is telling me, growing up, he had a bit of issues with that with her parents, strangely, where they thought she was going down a wrong path for liking dragon media.
Mm,
Obviously, it had nothing to do about that.
I see.
But now
Also,
it's completely different, even more so in the years she has been alive. The people have grown very fond of dragons. I can recall her cousin playing with dragon toys from, oh, what was the movie? Um, How to Train Your Dragon, I believe. He was young at the time, but he was playing with a bunch of those toys. Other people can and were too.
yeah.
It's
Also, hey, Aurora. Oh, sorry.
yes.
Hello. I actually wanted to pop in because there's another aspect as well that I think we haven't covered yet. I think that aside from all of the ancient myths and tales, we also have modern day varieties as well. Um, not necessarily, not automatically myths and stereotypes, but definitely, I'm sure it's influencing the opinions of people. Things like the Aragon series, the Wings of Fire books, How to Train Your Dragon. These are all stories that have inspired and fascinated people, and I'm sure that these stories are helping to influence people's opinions and ideas of how dragons work.
Yeah, I see.
I think I would agree with that as well. That is a good point to make. Does anyone else have any more thoughts regarding stereotypes and dragon myths and
Hmm.
how maybe other people will see us?
I think this was brought up in the chat earlier, though. I know there's also a stereotype of dragons stealing pretty princesses
Oh,
and locking them in towers.
that is a big stereotype. I um, do not recall anything like that for me. I'm trying desperately to think if I could recall stories such as that, but I know that it is a big trope. A dragon stealing. Why do you think a dragon would do that?
I don't think dragons, most dragons that I know, I don't think they would steal princesses. Like, I never understood, like, why would a dragon steal a princess? Why would a dragon specifically target a princess, especially the ones described in the old stories? Like, what reason would it be? Is it like a metaphor? Like, I never understood it.
I actually was thinking something similar. I have a hunch that the dragons were a metaphor for possibly even nobles, because I know another story archetype, some of it was true, were people who were noble being forced to marry into another family in order to ensure peace and prosperity. and possibly viewing them as a dragon that were whisking the princess away would definitely be inspiration for a story, even in those times.
Yee.
Never make sense. If we want to put it into a Christian lens, I suppose it's perhaps the devil or something of that nature, stealing somebody who's considered pure and good. I do believe, in a Greek story, my memory is extremely fuzzy here, where a princess of some sort was offered to some creature. I don't remember, or maybe it's just a trope. I believe it happens a few times with Greek stories, where a young maiden is offered as tribute to many different mythical monsters. The Minotaur is one I can think off the top of my head. The other, maybe the Kraken. The one, maybe for Medusa. Something of that nature. I think Theseus had something to do with it. So it could just be the continuation of a princess being offered to a creature. Usually not the animal stealing the princess for anything else other than for food. For Christianity lenses, this could just symbolize the killing of purity, as the person was always a virgin in one way or the other. And how evil things got a hold of them or tempted them or something of that nature. And then the hero is somebody who's brave and pure in heart that would vanquish the evil creature to save the purity of the town, the people themselves. If you want to get into that.
Yeah, understandable. Did anyone else want to come up on stage and speak? I guess not.
What's it mean? Any more final thoughts? Oh, there we go. Any more final thoughts in the chat on stereotypes and myths? It looks like we got Ryu and Doppel still typing. And if anybody has any more questions for me on how it feels to be, I suppose, a human dealing with these stereotypes, especially since we established that Zebras is a very stereotypical dragon. I agree once again with Rayer that these stereotypes also are projected onto other dragonkin. One person might project what they think a dragon should be based on stereotypes onto themselves and onto their others. Perhaps we should be more mindful not to always listen to stereotypes, and that being a dragon is fluid, and not one experience is similar like the other.
Mm-hmm. For once, it seems like we'll get a panel that'll end on time.
Absolutely fascinating. That is
Yes.
not a stereotype for this channel, I suppose. So forgive me, event. I'm
Yeah.
submitting the proper terms for everything here.
Understandable.
So, we will have you guys finish your final thoughts. I also agree, again, Ryu seems to be making some great points.
For sure.
And that the stereotype is a narrow view on dragons.
Yeah, incredibly narrow.
I think it's important, Ryu, that you continue your fight. And but I feel like in this channel thus far at these events, not many people are stereotypical. The stereotypes are held by people from the outside looking in, I would imagine.
Yeah, it seems so, and I think that applies not just to dragons, so anything really.
I agree. I agree. I think, at least in these circles of um dragonkind, that nobody is really like the other. I think you don't have to worry about the erasure of diversity here. No one here seems the same as everybody else.
Yeah, we're all pretty unique.
Outside, if I did not know Zebu, and I was being told about dragons, perhaps I would hold those stereotypes. But I wouldn't know. But all I've known is what has been fed to me. But here, knowing the community and seeing how everyone is different, that definitely broadens all of my view.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose with that, we shall end things.
Sounds good. Thank you for
And
hosting this panel, Eric. It was really interesting.
not a problem. Zeppy didn't want me to be. He said it was good for me to test out my public speaking skills.
Yeah, you did really good.
Thank you. He
Yes.
is saying she wants me to continue, so I might keep this until a bit later. Um, we'll be seeing each other in um voice, I suppose, and the text
Yes.
kind of that goes with it. You're very welcome, all of you. I'm glad to have met you all. It is very fascinating to be in such an area as this. I have never come across individuals like you previously, except for what Hasepi has shown me. So this is fairly new for me as well, even though I've kind of been aware of it. It was great to know you.
Yee. With that, I suppose we'll move to the Draconic voice chat then.
All right. That
Yee.
sounds like a plan. Everybody will see you in the Draconic voice.
Yes.